The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another Advanced Work Packaging Community of Practice webinar series session. We have another hour of great content lined up for you today. I'm going to pass it over to Lloyd Rankin of Group ASI, who will be facilitating. I'm sure those of you who are returning to the webinar series are familiar with Lloyd and with the Community of Practice, and those that aren't, I'll let Lloyd introduce himself and the community.
Hey, thanks a lot, Steve. Yeah, this is going to be a great session today on keeping track of your materials, knowing where things are. So I'm looking forward to hearing what our presenters are going to say. But before we get to that, just give me a minute or two to give you some information. Next slide, please. So the community of practice has just grown by another 550 today. So between the AWP Community of Practice North American chapter and the South American chapter, which just launched today, we now have approximately 2,000 members. But that's not good enough. We need to grow the membership because we've got all this great information on advanced work packaging, and we want to get it out to not only you, but also your connections. So when you're in the community of practice, you'll note that there's an invite connections button. If you have friends that are in the AWP community and you want them to be aware of the sessions that we're running and be able to join up, the best way to do it is just to go into your invite connections button, click on the people that you think would benefit from this, and then send them an invitation. You'll note if you're not a member of the community of practice, the best way to get there is to just go awpcommunity.com, and that'll take you right to the page, and you can easily just join the group there. We're pretty good at monitoring the site, so we'd love to see you not just attend the webinars, but also be a member of the community. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned the community of practice. There is a South American chapter now to the community of practice. They have 550 members. They have just had their first webinar this morning. 75% of their members are from Brazil, but they also have people in Chile, Peru, and Argentina. They are very well organized, and they're being led by a group called Barham Partners. They have a very impressive board of directors and advisory board. And we'll be sharing with you developments on the North American Board of Directors and Advisory Board, and this is a plug for us. If your organization is interested in influencing the community of practice, we would love to talk to you about joining us on the advisory board. So please send us a message and we'll follow up with you outside of the webinar. Next slide, please. So the virtual summit is coming up in just less than 1 month, and I'm very excited about that because we have presentations that are going to address supply chain and other areas. A reminder, the fee for the 2 days of the virtual summit is $175, but if you're not a CII member, but you belong to the community of practice, then the rate drops from $225 to $200. And I think that's pretty great value because you're getting 5 presentations, another 2 hours of discussion, and there'll be a total of 7 professional development points. So if you're like me, I'm a PMP, I'm always looking for those points to keep myself in good standing. Next slide, please. The program as you can see, the first day we're going to hear about supply chain. We're going to hear about commissioning, completions, and startup. We're going to hear about how to promote AWP. 3 different teams, 2 years working on this. Lots of concrete information that you can use to improve your AWP program. The second day is more focused on data, and that will help us know what needs to be put in our contracts through the data requirements presentation, and how we can make our supply chain more visible. Because we all know that materials and engineering are huge problems if we don't status them properly and if we don't free our constraints. And these 2 report outs will help with both of those things. So strongly recommend you join up to the virtual summit. If you're planning on sending a larger group, just reach out to us and we can help you. We do have some discounts available for larger teams. And without any further ado, I'd like to pass this over to Jeff, and he can, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, we have 2 conferences coming up. A virtual conference on October 27th to 29th. And we're pretty excited about that one. And then the London conference, we've actually pushed it back to the beginning of March. So our websites have been updated. You can go there, get agendas, gather information. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. So now I'll pass it over to Jeff, and he will introduce himself, and so will John. So take it away, guys.
Thanks, Lloyd and Steve. Appreciate the chance, the opportunity to get in front of this audience today. That's a wonderful, wonderful chance for us to talk supply chain and AWP. So hello to everyone, and thank you for participating in your time. We appreciate that very much. The subject matter we'll be covering today is focused on material data and how supply chain as a function and digital supply chain concepts can play ever-increasing roles in enabling AWP to provide its maximum benefit to projects. So on the next slide, if you allow me to please more fully introduce myself. My name is Jeff Houts, and I founded Constructing Supply Chain a few months ago after a 30-year career at a global major EPC contractor. My most recent roles there included 2 international mega projects as supply chain leader. I was also head of material planning and field material management for several years, which led to my mindset that focuses on buildability and work packaging and data, which are CSC's key priorities over traditional purchasing and expediting as focus areas. My co-presenter and I are both on research team 363 with CII, which you saw on a slide just a minute ago from Lloyd, studying that team studying supply chain's role in advanced work packaging. So with that, I'll turn it over to John. So if you could please introduce yourself, John.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate that. So John Walker with Atlas RFID Solutions, currently holding the position of Vice President of Strategic Services. Been with Atlas for about 10 years now, and I've seen the evolution of, the importance of our tool being used for tracking things around a job site and knowing where it's at, where that's obviously a super important piece of the puzzle. But as of late, we've seen a huge shift and transition to the concept of digital supply chain. And really happy and excited to not only have participated in the research teams in the past and kind of uncovering the power of digital supply chains, but also being able to, explain some of the concepts, fundamentals of what we've seen over the past few years and the evolution of the industry in terms of adopting a digital supply chain. So looking forward to going through this presentation. And as Jeff said, I'll echo it. I really appreciate the attention, and we'll have a question and answer section at the end that we'd love to get into a discussion and kind of open up, so you can put your questions down in the GoToWebinar question section, and we'll try and weed through those if we have time towards the end and answer those. So once again, thank you for the time, and we look forward to digging into this. So with that being said, Jeff, you've got 30 years experience within EPC supply chain. So you've seen a lot. You've seen a lot of different methodologies. You've seen a lot of different execution strategies. So in your opinion, really define what traditional supply chain means. So let's kind of level set with the audience here and start there.
No, thanks. John, that is a good place to start. It's a misunderstood term in a lot of ways these days. And when I began, my first business card had the department called Procurement on it. And so that certainly has evolved over the years. But for the point of today's presentation, I think we want to focus on supply chain, meaning two things. The first, which you see on the screen, the first bullet talks about supply chain being a function. It's a project function that performs tasks in an order, but certainly the core purchasing thing, certainly expediting the movement of goods and logistics and quality surveillance and field material management and warehousing. That has evolved from those things to become this bigger function that does all those other things too than just purchasing. Well, besides just being a function, it's also a process. It's a set of tasks and roles that follow the flow of something, follow the flow of a piece of material on a project. The supply chain begins in engineering when something is designed and identified. It continues, the supply chain continues to follow that item through the various disciplines, through the material management tasks, and the supply chain ends, this process ends upon the installation of that material at the job site, the completion of this evolution of this flow all the way from idea to installation. So both a function and a process. But we're here to sort of give a twist on this about a digital supply chain and what it does for AWP. So I'll jack it back to you, John, and ask, so what do we mean by digital supply chain?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's a great overview of kind of the functional and process elements of supply chain. And so, you know, what digital supply chain and the concept actually means is not really adjusting the key processes and functions that have been performed. We're not saying really you're not going to procure anymore, you're not going to expedite anymore. But in reality, it's a mindset and an execution strategy of actually transforming traditional exchanges of information that is typically consumed, passed, managed, monitored between the various parties in the supply chain, such as suppliers, contractors, engineering firms, and so forth, from a document-centric world to a data-centric world. And what I mean by that is, instead of playing spreadsheet bingo back and forth or sending necessary documentation with an actual physical shipment of truck, you know, moving that information sharing and exchange to a data-centric approach further up into the supply chain. And so what that means is really we're trying to transform the traditional information exchange from document-centric to a data-centric environment. And, you know, why do we want to do that really is kind of a question that we want to boil down. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the benefits and some of the reasons why we want to transform from kind of the document approach to a data-centric and a digital supply chain. And we'll go through these. So really the key component is to transform all of your components and information coming throughout the supply chain into data attributes that more importantly can be tied back to your respective work packages. So as it relates to AWP, you know, being able to take all of the widgets that are coming from a supplier and be able to break those down and apply them to a package. And what I mean by that is, in a traditional ERP tool purchasing system, we buy a pump. Well, in reality, that pump may be 50 different widgets. And oftentimes we don't know about those 50 widgets before they hit the job site. So some of the advantages of a digital supply chain is put that, you know, that onus on the supplier to provide that information well in advance of those items coming to the job site to help eliminate some of the unmanaged ship loose components that we have on the job sites. Also being able to provide truly constraint-free AWPs because you actually know all of the materials that relate to that package. And so really being able to understand the effect of change, you know, data is always connected to the things that it affects, and really being able to boil down into the transformation of all of those components into a digital format well ahead of them actually arriving at the job site is a huge advantage of the digital supply chain. You know, like as Jeff mentioned, we've done a lot of work over the past few years. There's been multiple different research teams kind of digging into how do we make this all work? How, you know, what are we asking here? And one of the key concepts we saw is really integration of suppliers into an overall project plan. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I get into kind of the core materials management systems and how we monitor and manage that, and some of the recommendations out of that. But really, integrating the suppliers tighter into the project plan is really beneficial both ways. If dates slip, being able to update those in an electronic digital format from the supplier is much better than having to do phone conversations back and forth, or emails even, and then vice versa. If the project plan flips from the expediters or from the construction crew, being able to update the suppliers accordingly, because that can impact their manufacturing or productivity on producing the actual goods. So that's really important piece of integrating into the project plan. The other important part of a digital supply chain is auto ID, and what I mean by that is really identification of assets upstream. So whether it's a barcode, whether it's an RFID tag, Bluetooth Low Energy, whatever type of IoT or auto ID sensor that you're applying on your job sites, move that application process up into the supply chain and have those items automatically identified prior to departure. There's many benefits of that. Obviously downstream, it's much easier to identify things that come in with a barcode on it that tie directly back to the purchase order, supplier bill of materials, than it is to try and decipher paint pen written on the outside of a crate. So there's a lot of advantages to the integration of the auto ID within a digital supply chain concept that is not only beneficial upstream for identification, but downstream when it arrives at the job site, and then managing those assets throughout. So what are some other key elements? If we take a look, materials management, supply chain is really a glue that holds together a lot of different functional elements of project execution, from WorkFace planning, engineering, schedulers. There's always going to be some sort of demand and need from the materials management group in order for WorkFace planning to plan their work accordingly, scheduling to ensure there's no constraints to meeting critical path scheduling, and then take a look at engineering. There's all kinds of information that vendors send that are needed for engineering, designing, understanding how things are going to actually fit, be installed. But traditionally, this exchange of information is very analog. It's picking up a phone. Hey, did you get this? You got your material clerk here in an office keying in all of this data that comes in a paper-based, document-centric format in order to fuel the various functions to execute work properly. So digital supply chain is really taking that document-centric approach and digitizing it by the suppliers so that now the information can be shared freely without a lot of labor sharing that information, keying it into a system throughout all the functional elements within the project. So it's not a, hey, I got to go get this information. The information is pushed to me upon it being authoring further up into the supply chain. So those are some real concepts around, why digital supply chain is important, and why we're going through all this to kind of transform and really help fuel a healthier AWP program. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff and let him run through some of the themes of a digital supply chain as it relates to AWP Health.
Thanks, John. So that was, as you said, some of the whys. This begins talking about, I guess, some of the hows. And so I wanted to throw up a few of these themes to get everybody's mind in the same place, if that's possible. The first is a bit of an eyebrow raiser for you. The bullet reads, supply chain must be an integral part of AWP because it's not about procurement. And I pause for effect. And that's very intentional because it's not about buying things. It's about the buildability of where that's going to get installed. It's not about procurement. So if traditionally or decades ago, it was about the home office PO execution, then we would never do anything to feed anything about constructability. We just buy in whatever order something hits our desk. Well, it needs to be harder than that, because if we step up and do something that isn't easy, which we call material planning, we've then done more hard work in advance to feed better WorkFace planning and AWP. But it's not easy, which is why it's been hard to even get this far and get that planning brought upstream. But we know it's not easy, but we need to still do more of it. Another theme or a concept is never buy and forget. So very often, as most of you know well, is sure, it's easy to just call your job done and send something on its way without having any idea how it's going to get put together at a job site. That buying and forgetting concept has no place in material planning. It has no place in what we need to be doing to help AWP get better. This next here is an interesting one, really, because it's all about a sort of a theme. Are we about home office work in engineering work packages or engineering workflow or engineering deliverables? Or are we about being a bridge to enable a construction or a CWP mindset, feeding the field with efficiencies that they can gain? Are we about ISO issuance, or are we about CWP constraints? So that's a theme we really want to try to drive home, is not just being the bridge again, but being a focus on the end in mind. And buying, as this next bullet says, buying with a tie to the work package, where it's going at a job site, as well as when it's needed at a job site. Never buy without a tie to those things, and keep those ties alive until they're installed. Always, no matter what it is, from the biggest of the equipment to the smallest of the bulks. So material data feeds a digital supply chain, and it's about the buildability of a work package, not just when it's going to show up at a job site. Very, very key point to what we're trying to say. So on the next slide, we talk about points of data. What are these types of material data? And these are examples, simple examples, I know, but the first is, of course, schedule data is about material data. Something will have to have a plan around it to know when it's supposed to be needed. So that's a point of data we want to manage well. Know its accuracy, keep up with its change, etc. Of course, delivery data, the groups that items are in as they move toward the job site, including, like John said earlier, all the 50 things that are part of that pump skid. Those have to be grouped and managed by time also. Certainly forecasting whether material will be a work package's constraint, and doing that before anything actually shows up at a job site is the point about material planning. And you need solid, finer material data to do that. Engineering owns quantities, attributes, and material types, etc. Those are all standards that are engineering standards, but that too is material data. I call it supply chain data. Everything feeds the supply chain because it starts in engineering and ends in construction. So this is, quantities, attributes, and specs and types. Tagging and marking is an interesting one too, because that too is a obviously super critical point of data, but how many times have we seen tagging and marking go wrong? Duplicate buys happen, renumbered tagging conventions, marking conventions leads to surplus. Think about if you have a JV partner and theirs is different than yours and you're using both, and you get the point. Lastly, like John with Auto ID mentioned, location at or on the way to the job site is another point of data that's very, very important for us to manage and keep up with. How often do we lose track of where something is at a job site and go double buy something, or spend 2 days trying to find one valve? So super important. They all have a major importance to AWP health, or major role. So Touchpoints. This is a way to summarize this first part of the presentation, really. There are 4. These are sort of phases of the project and what the touch points are to digital supply chain. So in the first, design, this is where, as I've said, the supply chain begins. Crafting the flow is a nice way to say it, I think. Crafting the flow and the health of the data as it flows through the system, including, again, the super important tie to the work breakdown structure and the work packaging convention that the project has crafted for itself. The next phase of the project, where material data first gets actioned, or design and engineering data, it says, first gets actioned. This is where supply chain should, and material planners can, first perform projections of buildability by work package. Now, this is during the supply phase of the project, and it should happen there and not waiting until the items are all at a job site and then you figure out about buildability. We advocate for doing this up front before things ship so that you know how big or small your problems are before they have to be handled at the job site. The next phase is when the goods are transported, moved through logistics to the site. We want to make sure that the tie to the work package of those goods is kept, is not lost during transportation, during the logistics phase. Often it is. And the tie between the material that's on that ship, on that truck, to its work packages is having to be reconstructed at the job site. And that's a problem. It doesn't have to be a problem if the tie is not lost between the time it's bought and the time that it shows up at the site. And lastly, of these four phases or touch points, if you will, is the most important stage. Fed by data that's healthy and all of those previous steps, this is where WorkFace planning and the magic happens, right? Using all aspects of this digital supply chain created data, healthy data to perform accurate and trusted, complete IWP creation. And so this is sort of driving home the whole point. If we do all this work to make the data in supply chain and engineering be better and tighter and better managed, shepherded all the way to the job site, we're enabling that health we keep talking about. We're doing our job to make AWP healthier for the project. So John, now that I've said all that, maybe you could lead us through some examples of the keys to success.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I think you touched on some really great points. I appreciate you going through that. And one key word that stuck out to me from what you said was work. It is work to make a digital supply chain successful. It does not happen overnight, but the rewards and the benefits that ensue downstream are worth the climb, right? And so, we've wrapped together some keys to what we feel like really constitute success and help drive a successful digital supply chain execution strategy. It is a strategy, it's a mindset, it is a program. It's not a software tool. It's not some language in a contract. It's not, putting an RFID tag or a barcode on something. Those are great attributes or concepts that relate to a supply chain, but that's not the supply chain execution strategy. It's all those components combined together with solid core processes and people to help monitor them. And so we look at some of these concepts, as I was saying, it's define the strategy. Start up front at execution of a project. It's not just language in the contract, it's really define it out. And what I mean by that is make sure that all expectations are met all around and understood all around, but set these expectations with all parties, suppliers, fabricators, vendors, even downstream expediters, field materials management team, set accurate and measurable expectations within the program. One of the things I think in the past that we've done, I believe we've all, and pretty much all EPC construction has asked certain things of vendors. Thou shalt provide packing slip well in ahead, 60 days, or whatever it may be. But did we ask for it in a way that could be measured? Did we ask for it in a way that we could monitor compliance? So setting a strategy that helps allow setting accurate and measurable expectations will allow for ensuring that compliance can be monitored, right? And so oftentimes some of our language and the expectations that we set forth with in our digital supply chain or AWP processes can be too ambiguous or nebulous. Supplier will provide packing lists. Well, that you may get it in a Word document, you may get it in a PDF, you may get it in XYZ. It's setting forward a template that will be used. It's setting forward a data standard that will be used, and then ensuring that that is being put forward properly and compliance is being withheld. Ensure that all are participating in this. And what I mean by that, some of the key concepts is treat data as a widget. If we did not provide a widget as a supplier to a project site, an OS&D is raised, a shortage is raised, and payment is attached to that. So you got to get out of this concept of, oh, they'll send it next time. It's really, we've got to be able to put a program in place that ensures compliance and that everybody in the supply chain understands the expectations of participating in a digital supply chain program. Like I said, it's not easy, but it is a strategy and a mindset. Second to last here is really the people element, right? It's this concept of a digital supply chain coordinator is key. We're going to talk about this towards the end of the presentation, but really empowering an individual that is really a liaison between procurement, supply chain, and construction to help usher, monitor, and ensure the health of a digital supply chain program is key. WorkFace Planning rolled out the concepts. A WorkFace planner was attached to it because there were certain things that you couldn't just dump off on other people within your org charts. But those things done properly provided immense value downstream. This is the same concept with digital supply chain coordinator. It doesn't happen overnight. Set a process, but set people and empower people to help monitor and ensure compliance of that program through a digital supply chain coordinator. Jeff will touch on this towards the end, but that's a really key piece. And then lastly, the technology side of things. We live in a digital world. In order to do these things, it is much easier with a supply chain tool that can support it. So I'm about to go through here in a second, really see 6 key functional elements that we feel like constitute a good materials management system, and some of the elements around those and why it's important to have that. So in summary, these are 6 key steps. It's probably not all the steps. It's not an exhaustive list. There's a lot of stuff we can dig into, probably a presentation off each one of these bullets, or multiple hour discussion off of each of those. But these put together will put you in a good position to have success implementing a digital supply chain program. And so I'm going to shift a little bit from kind of the why are we doing it to the process and procedural elements of a digital supply chain. And let's get down into some of the technology sides of the supply chain. We are talking about using data to fuel AWP and this digital threads concept. In order to have that, you got to have a tool that obviously can support it. So I want to dig through what we feel like really are key components of a digital supply chain system and a robust platform, if you will, that allows for digital supply chain success, right? And so we got to break it down into 6 key elements of the tool, from purchasing to logistics to inventory and allocation, managing the goods on site, to administrative function, which is really important. I'll start there. To tracking, forecasting, and then interaction with fabrication from a detailing fabrication standpoint. So these are kind of the buckets, and there's many different elements that are in these buckets, but I'm going to focus on just a few through this presentation. And I'm going to start with administrative. And in my opinion, this is a really key point. And so, within today's world, solutions are typically cloud-based, and what that means is there's access to them through a web browser. Somebody can go in with the user role permissions and passwords and log into it from a remote location. So having this supply chain tool be cloud-based and a deep roles and permission capabilities allows for multiple parties to log in and see information based on their scope of work. So what I mean by that is if you have a supplier that's only providing valves, they can log into this tool and be able to see only their scope of work. Whereas the materials manager for the project or for the owner can see all POs and all that good stuff, right? This allows for separation of data to allow for certain individuals to get in and author the information upstream for the goods that are flowing down and be able to have a central repository for this information. In addition to that, there are multiple systems that we use outside of a supply chain or materials management system on our project site. And so the tool has to have the ability to move data seamlessly in and out of it. It could be as easy and manual as a spreadsheet export import, kind of like a poor man's integration, if you will, or a robust API and integration capabilities to automatically connect to external systems, such as scheduling to pull down certain dates or activity IDs against packages, right? And that have a dynamic update system with that. So really having the ability to have, communicate with other systems in the project execution is key, right? So the next bullet I really want to kind of get to is this purchasing and procurement. A couple key points of the tool needs to be able to allocate bulks across work packages. So I think, there are advantages still to purchasing in bulk, but then being able to allocate the goods that were purchased by one single vendor across multiple different packages in order to understand, shorts, right, or your problems or things you need to expedite. Be able to allocate those across the work packages. And then projects change, scopes change, things update. So the tool has to be dynamic in the ability to capture change management. This relates to quantities as well as the spend, ensuring that you're really capturing that at a detailed level for good bookkeeping and a lot of less manual effort, closing out POs and so forth. The next piece is really interfacing with fabricators. There's tons of items come from these fabricators, whether it be structural steel, whether it be pipe spools, and having the ability to track key milestones from a plan, forecast, and actual perspective in a tool is key. And then being able to take the piece marks and spool data from the fabricators and put that into the system to then receive against that makes your life much easier downstream when trying to manage it. So when we send an isometric drawing and the fabricator cuts it up into ABC pieces, we'd be able to pull that back into the system seamlessly so that we can receive against that and then make sure that we can manage it downstream once it hits the job site. So those are really key points around kind of the components that need to be there for the detailing fabrication side of things. Tracking and forecasting is obviously super important. There's a lot of really cool stuff going on out there with a lot of the modeling tools and integrating certain aspects of planning into the modeling engines. But the same can be said with supply chain data. So being able to share the information from supply chain and push that into a model to see immediately what spool is going to be late, what spool's on site, what spool may have damage. All these different elements will help you better plan your work. And really then being able to understand, delivery by CWP on the job site. So how are your materials coming into the job site? How are they going to be grouped? Are they by package? Are they in a CCAN by CWP? So this tracking and forecasting side of things really helps you understand late items that could ultimately delay your schedule, which is obviously not anything we want to deal with. Logistics. This is a good point. So there are so many 3PLs out there and so many ways to move materials through our complex projects and supply chains that we have these days. But those 3PLs have very sophisticated systems as well. And they're oftentimes using different types of GPS tagging or systems in place that, being able to pull information from those 3PL tools will provide a wealth of knowledge in terms of material expectations of delivery. So that's a really key piece. And then receive at all items. And I mentioned this in kind of the opening, the ship loose item. My past experience is materials management, EPC construction, and I can't tell you how many times I've been bit in the rear by not handling ship loose properly. But in the event that the supplier has not authored all of the components upon sending the items, you need to have the ability to capture these upon receipt to ensure that you're managing all of your constraints as it relates to a work package. And then obviously in the event that goods are not in conforming with what was purchased, being able to open OS&Ds and have the full management and work processes around remedying those discrepancies upon material deliveries are key within the tool. Lastly here, keeping up with your goods. Hundreds of thousands of goods need to be kept up with by the materials management teams on these projects. And it's not an easy task, right? It's definitely not an easy task, even with everything identified, but not identifying everything makes it much easier. And I have a feeling that materials management teams, if everything's identified, do a very, very good job of keeping up with what they know they have. So being able to, leverage auto ID, barcoding, or RFID, IoT type sensors for identification and also keeping up with materials is a really key element. And the last two bullets of this is obviously important, and that's the scenario planning of trial allocations and being able to interface with WorkFace planning tools, because as I mentioned multiple times, things change, but we need to have the ability to understand what changes impact and what changes we'll be able to construct based on supply chain information and material availability. So are these goods coming? Are these goods here? Can I actually work on this work package in this adjusted trial allocation or trial plan? So those are really key elements of the digital supply chain system that we feel like helps, obviously from a technology side of things, fuel a healthy digital supply chain as well as the data required to fuel AWP programs. So with that being said, I want to turn it over to Jeff here to talk a little bit about the last piece, which is kind of the people, right? Digital supply chain coordination, and I'll let him run with this. So take it away, Jeff.
Thanks, John. So yeah, if we did a perfect job of setting up a digital supply chain to make for perfect AWP implementations, we'd need this right role and right person, like John mentioned earlier, which we happen to call a digital supply chain coordinator. But please correct me if I'm wrong, but I've never seen it actually exist before, the way that we've defined this. And so we advocate for the creation of this role on projects, and it'll help supply chain, it'll help the whole project, it certainly will help AWP. Given that, and the next bullet, John, this person, whoever they are, is not the PIM, not the project information manager, which is an IT role governing what software is used. It's not the procurement systems lead. It's not the engineering material controller who's doing takeoffs and arranging engineering data. It's a performer of a lot of these material planning concepts, setting up data so it can be run through scenarios, it can be planned for, et cetera. Like we said earlier, it is a type of supply chain WorkFace planner concept by setting up data for its packaging success, right? So it is an overseer of digital threads and data exchanges, certainly, and that doesn't exist, at least for material management, that doesn't really exist today. And the leader of system integration processes. Think about the project where, just paint a quick picture, EP contractor is a joint venture, the construction contractor is a joint venture. Certainly split home office versus job site. Say there's double systems with a client because they want stuff in their system too, so double entry is happening. Then there's modularization on top of that. Who's keeping track of material data through all of those touch points and systems that need to talk to one another? A bunch of people all doing it only fair and not great. That's really where projects look like today. So I think if a digital supply chain coordinator role existed, that would be much more healthy. This slide is a way to very quickly and simply illustrate what this would do for a project, this triangle of execution. It's sort of like the three-legged stool, if you will, where if digital supply chain coordination could help feed the flow of data from the left, which is the supply chain, over into construction, we're creating or being a part of this bridge that many times doesn't exist, sort of a bridge of data from the home office, from the left to the right, all for the sake of that WorkFace planner construction role, certainly, but the WorkFace planner doing a absolute best job that he or she can at the job site, making AWP healthier. So we're going to keep advocating for that role, and we have a job description. I have a job description for that role. We're hoping that we turn it someday into as good of a thing as WorkFace planning has become, and still feed the AWP machine. So the next slide is a summary slide. So I'll quickly run through sort of this summary points that we've come up with. And the first is that this concept, this process shepherds healthy data from its beginning in engineering through the WorkFace planning process at the job site. From beginning to end, we shepherd data. The second point is the function of supply chain through these material planning concepts has a responsibility here. And I really want to say that strongly. If we as a function shirk that or avoid that responsibility, we're going back to just, buying and forgetting and just being these core purchasing and expediting concepts. We haven't fed the customer, the internal customer, the job site with what we should be doing for them in support of their success. The third is we suggest that a digital supply chain coordinator exist to strengthen that bridge between home office and job site. Certainly advocate for that. Next, bulks. So the focus for this work must be on bulks, ship loose, sub items, and shop fab. Said it a million times, right? I don't care about the compressor in the vessel or the transformer. It's irrelevant to this work. It's about the small stuff. This is why healthy and accurate supply chain data is critical. That's where our focus must remain. Yeah, thank you. So this too is sort of like an eyebrow raiser, but I can't help myself. So flooding the job site with material in whatever order it hits our desk to buy, throwing a WorkFace planner onto sorting it out and calling it AWP is not AWP. We're helping that order of material and data to become fully 100% stood up AWP for the project. Only then are 100% of the benefits realized. So we have a responsibility to not do what's on this slide. Lastly is the packaging of material, packaging everything, beginning to end with this healthy and seamless data. And it's all those data points. It's scheduled data, it's tags and mark pieces. It's all of those points of data makes healthy AWP. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is how digital supply chain can do just that. So we need to step up as supply chain and take a bigger role in creating this concept for our projects, and everybody will be better off for it. And that is our presentation, and we can certainly transition to Q&A. We have a pretty good amount of time left, it looks like. And so I'll leave it to you, Steve, perhaps or Lloyd, to facilitate that for us to answer, get the discussion going. How would you like to handle it?
I think we can let Steve do the fielding of questions, but I just want to say that was a great presentation. I think you really clarified the difference between what we've been doing and where we need to go. So I'm looking forward to seeing what questions the attendees have. So let's just see what's coming.
Sure. Yeah. So there's one question from John. What is RAS short for? Maybe that was already.
Yeah, RAS, which is sometimes also known as ROS, is required at site or required on site. It's a pretty common acronym used for what the plan is, the need is for something showing up at the job site. Yep, required at site.
Okay, great. And there are a couple of questions about will this presentation be available afterward? Yes, we will definitely send a recording out to everyone who registered and attended. So hopefully that will be helpful to you. Can you talk a little bit about PWPs? This question from Rupesh.
Yeah, John, I'm going to ask you to start, if you would, because you have been involved in other CII activities centered around PWPs versus CWPs. So maybe if you could start, I'll add some color.
Yeah, I think, some of the things that's up for debate, and some of the things that we're working through within our research team is the concept of PWP. And I think that the biggest thing is, is it a process or is it a package? And so some of the things that, we've started looking at and coming out with is there's a concept of PWP, which, structure the goods for logical purchasing against, requirements from an EWP. And then there's the concept of the movement and functional delivery of those goods in certain process standpoints. And we feel that's kind of along the lines of a supply chain process. And so I guess we've kind of broken it down into kind of two different things, PWP being the act of purchasing logically, and then the secondly would be, supply chain process is the process related to, a seamless delivery and execution of getting the goods in inventory, managing them, and then getting them out to construction. Is kind of where we're looking at right now. I think there may be a little debate up on it and probably a little bit more further definition once our research team is finalized and read out, but that's kind of where we're at now. I think that's been a tough one. Truth be told, we've spent a lot of time in various capacities and various research teams debating that. PWP, is it a package, is it a process, what does it actually mean? So I think we're getting some clarity coming for that. Probably didn't do a very good job of describing it, but that's kind of where we're at right now. Jeff, please add to that.
Yes, thanks. That was great. Some of the first, this is Jeff again, so some of the first pushback that I heard from others when this concept first arose was, wait, are you saying that my one PO is going to be split into 10 different POs because that procurement work package has a different required at site than the other procurement work package? And I don't think that was ever anybody's real intent of advocating for the procurement work package process. But let me try to say this in a different way. If you had 10 pumps, 10 widgets, 10 whatever they are, and you knew that the 10 had 10 different construction work packages they were going to be assigned to and grouped with at the job site, you could still buy those 10 items all at the same time, but keep the tie to those 10 separate, unique CWPs throughout the whole work process. That's the same thing to me as buying and actioning 10 things separately, because you know where and when they're bound to arrive at the job site. If some are early, fine. If some are late, you got a problem. Plan for that. So material planning concepts can solve a lot of that PWP misconception.
Okay, so we've got that was a really great response. Thank you so much. And thanks for the question, Rupesh. I'm just taking a quick look here. Lawrence, actually, there's a bit more of a complex question here from Bernd. How do you think the numerous suppliers with different capabilities to organize themselves, which you normally have from all over the world, can be integrated under a digital supply chain platform?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, you go, John. We talked about this before.
If you have something, go ahead. I just two concepts here. I think that's a fantastic question, and that's once again kind of the point of this is it's not easy, right? But the programmatic approach, the compliance monitoring, and ensuring that the suppliers are playing by the rules set forth in the contracts that are let to them. And when I say contracts, making them aware of the program, the steps included in the program, the expectations in the program, not after contract execution, but in the actual RFP and the bid documentation, so that they can understand fully what they're getting on board with. Now, yes, there are some suppliers that are more advanced in terms of information sharing and gathering than others. I feel like, that's great. If there is a tool that can seamlessly push information directly into the supply chain tool, then let's leverage that. It makes it easier for them to participate in this. But more importantly, getting the suppliers to participate in this has to be easy for them, and it has to be straightforward. It can't be a complex system. And so being able to easily put tags on items before they ship and then identify that within a system, whether it be by a standard template of some sort or directly authored into a supplier portal through this digital supply chain concept, can help with those. But bottom line is the easiest way to deal with it is ensure expectations are set forth up front in the very early phasing of contracting with said providers, and then the monitoring and the compliance of that being folded back into your approved vendor list for future consideration, that if somebody did not play ball and it was a problem child, then perhaps there's other sources of goods. And I think that goes back to Jeff's comment, never buy and forget. I think we also should get away from, it's hard to say, but it's the truth, chasing the lowest dollar. And so I think there is some value in better capable suppliers providing better information that is way more valuable downstream to better planning and executing our work to prevent schedule delays and productivity impacts. Jeff, go ahead and add to that, please. I don't know if that makes sense. Or
I'm just trying to think of a great example. I'm thinking of structural steel in a release, just for 1 second, just to give it a real life example. So say it's really important for the EPC contractor and the owner to have the details of every mark piece of steel on a release back into the EPC contractor's reference system, their material system, before shipment. It sounds easy, right? Well, we've all seen this. Many of you have seen this before too. So we can say to the fabricator, which might be a new fabricator to us, we need all of that data right after it's detailed while it's in fabrication. So we have all of that ahead of time before the shipment so we can get the site working on doing its part to get ready for receipt. Well, if we didn't outline the requirement to do it, like John said, the details of that requirement, what system, what format, what spreadsheet, what template, what other systems, right from the detailers, Tekla's, output file, whatever it's called. Well, then we haven't enabled that fabricator to be successful. We didn't set them up to be able to do that. We may not have even told them until the order is signed that we're going to require that. So it may be simply impossible for that fabricator to participate in this digital supply chain requirement. And then what do? Well, we say, oh, well, every other supplier besides this fabricator will have to do that. And, then that's a slippery slope. Then your system is broken. So identifying, and not just to enforce some difficult requirement, that could be easy for a fabricator if we set it up, talk about it in the kickoff meeting, make sure there's nothing hidden, no surprises. That's just the first sort of example that came to my mind, John, but that's a great question for sure too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we've got time for one more question before we're going to have to close off the webinar.
Okay, sounds great. I'll throw out a quick comment from Anchor before we go to the final question. Anchor just says, great presentation. And Anchor agrees that the success of AWP, for the success of AWP, you must have a digital supply chain. So thank you for that comment, Anchor. And
thank you.
Question from Wes, is there a tool to link EWP with PWP with CWP to ensure readiness of each package?
There are several tools that are out there. I'll take a shameless plug. I think, at Atlas RFID, we have a tool, Jovix, that is a material readiness system, and it has full work packaging capabilities in it to link up those packages of demand against supply chain information. So, but with that being said, there are other tools out there that can do that as well, and different elements of that. I think it's really important to kind of back to the materials management system requirements. Not only linking those things together, but surfacing issues within those linkages. And what I mean by that is material delays and understanding that the information is surfaced, whether it be within a dashboard analytics platform, of your discrepancies and issues with the packages and how they relate to the planned scope of work. So I think that, there's several out there. Happy to dig into a deeper conversation offline about capabilities within our tool, and there's others that can help facilitate that too.
So I'd just like to do two things because we're 2 minutes away from the end now. First, I'd like to thank both presenters for a really well-organized, thoughtful presentation. So thank you very much for that. And finally, I'd like to say that at the virtual summit, when the report out is done on the integrating supply chain with AWP, you're going to get even more information. And the research report that's going to be generated, I think, will be incredibly valuable. So for those of you who haven't, I'd strongly recommend signing up for the virtual summit. John's going to be presenting as part of the supply chain team, and I think you'll get a chance to hear even more. So thanks very much, and we'll call this one a wrap.
Perfect. Any closing comments from John or Jeff?
Just from my perspective, I really appreciate everybody's time, and also thanks Lloyd and Stephen for giving us the opportunity to present today. So thank you very much for that.
Agreed. I very much echo it, and our email addresses are on the screen. We're certainly welcome to LinkedIn requests and keeping this conversation going offline. So thank you to everybody for being on.
Much appreciated. Have a great day, everyone. Stay safe.